On the far edge of known space, where star maps faded into darkness and supply ships stopped coming generations ago, a lonely colony called Erebus 7 struggled to survive. The sky was always gray, the wind cold and dry. The ground, though once promised to be rich in minerals, had given less with each passing year. The people who lived there were not adventurers anymore. They were descendants of the first settlers, tough, quiet folk who had grown used to disappointment. Communication with Earth had gone silent decades ago. Some said Earth itself had fallen. Others believed it simply stopped caring about a small outpost so far from home. No one knew the truth. The days were slow, the nights quieter still, and hope, like water, had to be carefully preserved. Elias Ward, once an engineer and now the colony's only working mechanic, walked the outer edge of the settlement, fixing an old perimeter sensor. The device had been broken for weeks, but no one cared much anymore. Nothing ever came. Nothing ever changed. As he tapped the panel back into place, it suddenly came alive with a soft beep. At first, Elias thought it was a false signal, but then the screen lit up again, stronger this time. Something was coming through the atmosphere. Big. Fast. His heart jumped. He rushed back to the central hub, where the rest of the council, just a handful of tired elders and tech workers, were gathered. They stared at the grainy screen as the object drew closer. At first, they thought it was a meteor, maybe one of the icy ones that burned bright and disappeared. But this wasn't falling. It was slowing down. The shape became clearer. It wasn't round or rocky. It was long, curved like a blade, and it glowed at the edges with a dull, deep blue light. No markings, no lights, no signal. Just silence. Elias leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The material wasn't like any Terran design he'd ever seen. It was too dark, absorbing even the faint starlight. The council whispered among themselves, voices rising with fear. They hadn't seen another ship in 30 years, and now one was coming straight for them. There was no way to defend the colony. Their surface lasers barely worked. The orbital defense system had shut down long ago due to power shortages. And even if they sent out a distress signal, who would hear it? They were alone. They always had been. The object passed low over the hills, sending a wave of cold air across the valley. Dust blew through the streets as children stared up from behind shuttered windows. The ship came to a stop just beyond the edge of the settlement, silent and unmoving. No doors opened, no lights blinked. It just sat there, like something ancient, something that had seen things the colonists could not imagine. Hours passed. Fear settled over Erebus 7 like a heavy fog. Some believed it might be a ship from a forgotten human faction. Others whispered, it was alien. Real alien. Something not just from another world, but another kind of existence. Elias returned to his workshop and dusted off an old terminal, one connected to a system he had hoped never to use. It was an emergency beacon, a relic from the first days of the colony. A message hard-coded into the system from the original Earth fleet. In extreme danger, activate. Hope may yet return. His fingers hovered over the worn-out keys. He knew it probably wouldn't work. The signal was old, weak, and Earth was so far away. But something told him the ship outside was not here by chance. Something told him they had been found, but not by friends. And as he pressed the beacon's activation switch, a soft light pulsed. Somewhere far away, beyond the stars. Something else blinked in return. The ship sat still just beyond the edge of Erebus 7, like a black scar carved into the land. Its shape was like a blade from a forgotten war, long, curved and silent, with edges that shimmered slightly in the dim light of the colony's sun. The people of the settlement gathered in doorways and watched it, afraid to speak too loudly, as if sound might awaken it. It made no move to contact them, no signal, No message. Yet it wasn't completely quiet. A low hum, deep and steady, could be felt more than heard. It stirred headaches in the young and made the colony's electronics flicker and glitch without warning. Machines stopped working. Lights dimmed. Some even claimed they could hear whispers in the static of their radios. Elias Ward, the old mechanic, with more scars than he had tools, sat in his dusty workshop, trying to make sense of the strange energy signature that pulsed through the colony's sensors. It was faint, but familiar. Decades ago, before he settled on this forgotten world, he had seen something like it during the last Terran border war. The engines, quantum resonance drives, were unstable, powerful, and outlawed long ago after a ship carrying one tore a city-sized hole into a moon. If this ship had such technology, then whoever built it was either desperate, dangerous, or both. The Colony Council argued over what to do, but there was little they could actually decide. They had no weapons strong enough to fight something that could cross light years with forbidden engines. In the end, they sent a small drone, one of the few pieces of tech still working well enough to fly. It disappeared into the shadows of the vessel's open underbay, then returned hours later, damaged and nearly out of power. What it brought back changed everything. The footage showed long, dark corridors lined with what looked like cages, hundreds of them. Some were open, empty, and rusted. Others held shapes that moved in the shadows. Not all were human. Some had limbs that bent the wrong way, or eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. One frame clearly showed a Terran flag on a tattered sleeve hanging from a cage wall. That was when fear turned to panic. The colony began preparations to hide, though. They had nowhere to run. Families packed bags they hadn't used in years. Old rifles were taken from walls. Elias, however, didn't join them. He remembered something deeper, something older. A protocol meant to be used only when there was nothing else left. He returned to the beacon he had activated earlier, deep in the colony's forgotten comms tower. The first signal had gone out, but there was more the system could do. The beacon had levels, layers meant for warships and emergency fleets, code designed to wake up sleeping satellites and dormant listening posts. He wiped the dust off the screen and typed in a sequence he hadn't thought about in decades. The machine protested at first, coughing static and red errors, but then the screen turned green. A low beep echoed in the room. The signal had been sent, this time farther and louder than before. Elias sat back in the chair, staring at the blinking light. Outside, the ship began to move, just a little. One of its lower sections shifted, like it was breathing. The hum deepened. Lights flickered across its dark skin, forming patterns that no one could read. In the silence that followed, the people of Erebus 7 waited. They didn't know if the signal had been received, or if anything human still remained out there to answer it. But now, something else knew they were here, and it was watching. The air above Erebus 7 had never felt heavier. As the strange alien ship grew louder and closer, long metallic arms unfolded from its underside, and small dark spheres began floating out, spreading silently in every direction. These were not simple machines. They pulsed with energy and left trails of static as they passed, and wherever they moved, systems in the colony failed. Defense grids that had barely worked were now completely blind. Communication panels sparked and went dead. Even gravity generators in the shelters began to flicker, leaving some areas weightless. Panic spread. The colony had nothing left to fight with. No ships, no trained soldiers, and nowhere to hide. The probes moved like hunters, scanning buildings, watching people, making no noise at all. Elias stood near the edge of the platform atop the communications tower, looking at the dark shape in the sky, wondering if his message had gone too far into nothingness. Then, without warning, the clouds tore apart with a sound like thunder, breaking through steel. A second sun burst into view, not natural, but driven by force and fire. A ship came through, a warship, massive and bright, streaking with blue light as it tore out of faster-than-light space like a hammer swung by the hand of a god. It was the TSV Hammer of Sol, one of Earth's oldest surviving dreadnoughts, long, thought-lost or decommissioned. At its helm stood Captain Rana Volkova, a hardened woman with silver in her hair and fire in her eyes, a veteran of battles most people only read about in history logs. She had spent years in the dead zones of the galaxy, searching for survivors, tracing ghost signals, and dismantling threats too dangerous to name. When she received Elias's ancient distress call, she didn't ask questions. She burned fuel, charged weapons, and set course immediately. Now, she hovered over Erebus 7 like a guardian returned from myth, and the enemy in the valley finally stopped moving. Volkova's ship scanned the alien craft in seconds. Her tactical AI identified it by its core signature, the Kravari, a nomadic species known to appear without warning and disappear just as fast, leaving ruined colonies behind. They collected genetic material from small, defenseless populations, studying, experimenting, sometimes even cloning. Few had ever survived their arrival, but this time, they had chosen the wrong target. Volkova gave the order, and the Hammer of Sol lit up the sky. Precision strikes hit the outer shell of the Kravari vessel, shaking it hard enough to be felt. In the colony below, its dark armor absorbed most of the energy, but not all. One of the probing arms was sliced off mid-flight and crashed into the forest beyond the ridge. In response, the alien ship changed shape. Its body retracted, twisted, and realigned, forming a combat stance. Lights danced along its surface like angry stars. The Kravari hadn't expected a fight, but now they had one. The colony became a war zone. The probes turned hostile, firing beams that melted steel and left deep burns in anything they touched. But Volkova's forces weren't passive. Drop pods launched from orbit, slamming into the ground like thunderbolts. Out stepped Terran Marines, clad in advanced armor that glowed with protective shielding. Trained in zero-G combat and alien encounters, they moved through the chaos with calm precision. Elias watched from cover as the soldiers pushed the enemy back, using coordinated tactics and overwhelming firepower. This wasn't just survival, it was a message. Humanity, though scattered and quiet in recent years, had not vanished. It had not been broken. It had simply waited for the right moment to remind the stars that Earth still stood. And now, for the first time in a long while, the people of Erebus 7 felt something stronger than fear. They felt hope. Because someone had come. Smoke drifted low across the ground as the alien ship continued its slow transformation into something more dangerous, more alive. The Kravari, no longer observing from a distance, now moved with clear intent. Strange. Drones poured out from the belly of their ship, spindly, insect-like machines that floated just above the ground, releasing clouds of pale mist that spread quickly through the colony. Wherever the mist touched, it scanned living things, mapping their biology, marking them with faint blue lights across their skin. Some colonists collapsed from the exposure. Others were unharmed but left shaken, as if something inside them had been touched. Elias Ward, standing near one of the wounded towers, watched grimly as the colony's sensors lit up with warnings. The mist wasn't just observing, it was preparing the population for something else. But the Hammer of Sol wasn't idle. From orbit, Captain Volkova saw the change in enemy behavior and launched her next wave. Drop troops equipped with advanced exo-armor that shimmered like liquid steel, designed to adapt in real time to battlefield threats. These soldiers, elite Terran infantry, hit the ground in tight units, moving with precision that only came from years of war and training. Their weapons cut through the drones, their armor resisted the scanning mist, and their helmets filtered the toxins in the air. But it wasn't just a one-sided effort. Elias and a handful of colonists, with years of survival knowledge etched into their bones, guided the troops through back roads, hidden paths, and collapsed tunnels. What began as a military operation turned into a partnership. The soldiers respected the colonists' grit, and the colonists, for the first time in years, felt pride in sharing the land they had kept alive for so long. Yet even as hope grew stronger, so did the enemy. Deep within the alien ship, the Kravari activated a glowing core at its center, a graviton drive unlike anything ever recorded by human science. The readings showed that if it fired, the valley would collapse entirely, crushing the colony under millions of tons of rock and soil. It was not just a weapon, it was an eraser, meant to leave no trace. Time ran thin. In the command room of the Hammer, Volkova and Elias stood over a projection of the Kravari ship. They had one option left. A stealth team, led by one of Volkova's best operatives, would infiltrate the enemy vessel and plant a data virus into its main system. If successful, the virus would disable the propulsion system and the graviton core, freezing the ship long enough for the dreadnought to finish it. The mission was near suicidal. The Kravari ship shifted constantly, its walls alive with movement, its defenses automatic and unforgiving. Still, the team dropped at midnight, silent and fast, landing through a gap blasted open by a coordinated strike. Inside, the corridors were dark and shifting, lit only by the glow of strange energy lines that crawled along the walls like veins. The soldiers moved like ghosts, planting charges and firing only when needed. Two were lost in a collapsing hallway. Another was taken by one of the living drones, pulled into the shadows with a scream no one could stop. But the team pushed on. At the core chamber, where the graviton engine pulsed like a heartbeat, the last 3 soldiers held the line while the virus was uploaded. The process was slow, the system resisting every step. But eventually, the core's light dimmed. The reading spiked and then dropped. Outside, the drones fell to the ground. The ship stopped humming. Its movements froze. The graviton core was dead. The colony had seconds to spare. As the Terran soldiers retreated, the Hammer of Sol turned its main cannon toward the now still alien ship. The final strike would come soon, and with it, vengeance. The alien ship, once a looming threat over Erebus 7, now groaned as it tried to lift off the ground, its once smooth flight systems shaking and sparking from deep within. But the virus had done its work. The graviton core stuttered, overloaded, and instead of rising cleanly into the sky, the massive vessel tilted awkwardly, its propulsion struggling against corrupted commands. With a final jolt, the ship broke free of the valley floor, but not for long. Its engines sputtered, and with a deafening roar, it spun out of control, crashing into the distant mountains in a wave of fire and metal. The shockwave swept through the hills, flattening trees and throwing dust high into the air, but the colony itself, scarred and cracked, remained standing. Captain Volkova, standing aboard the Hammer of Sol, gave a short nod to her crew. There would be no second chance. The target lock confirmed, the orbital strike sequence engaged, and moments later, a focused beam of white-hot energy carved through the clouds and struck the remains of the Kravari ship with surgical precision. What had once been a vessel of terror became molten wreckage scattered across the peaks. On the ground, the people of Erebus 7 slowly stepped from their shelters and shattered homes. Smoke still curled from rooftops, broken walls lay scattered across streets, and the scent of burned metal filled the air. But they were alive, and for the first time in many years, they were not alone. Medical shuttles descended from the Terran warship, bringing supplies, doctors, and engineers. Soldiers helped dig out the trapped and carried the wounded with care. Where the Kravari had tried to break them, humanity had come to rebuild. Volkova herself walked through the colony ruins, speaking not with grand speeches but with quiet promises. This place would be remembered, and it would never be left behind again. A new beacon would be placed here, powered by the Hammer's core, connecting Erebus 7 back to the Terran network. They were no longer forgotten. Near the ridge that overlooked the entire valley, Elias Ward stood in silence. His coat was torn, his hands bandaged, but his eyes remained sharp as they followed the smoke trailing from the distant mountain. The sun was rising behind it, casting light across the land that had almost been lost. For years, he had believed they were alone, that Earth had collapsed or turned away, that humanity had gone quiet and cold. But today proved something else. Humanity hadn't disappeared. It had endured. Quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, it had arrived not as a whisper, but as thunder in the sky. As the sun climbed higher, Elias felt something heavy lift from his chest. All around him, survivors were helping one another, clearing debris, laughing even through their pain. The colony wasn't just alive, it was awake. Above them, the hammer of Sol circled once more before turning its nose toward the stars, its mission far from over. There were other outposts like Erebus 7, other voices calling into the dark. But now they had a chance to be heard. And if anyone out there, friend or enemy, was watching, the message had already been delivered in fire and steel. Humanity doesn't vanish when times grow hard. It adapts. It waits. And when the moment comes, it rises. It does not run. It defends. It remembers. It returns. And most of all, it survives. As the wind rolled across the valley and the first clean rays of sunlight bathed the battered colony, Elias closed his eyes and whispered softly to no one in particular, "We're still here."